Hi, I'm Gulla. So weighing and measuring as a spiritual act is is a really challenging theme for me actually, and I didn't realize that until just earlier today because um, I was reminded to stay on theme and not go over my personal story too much, which is really my comfort zone. But then again, doing it in Icelandic is also part of my comfort zone. Yeah, so I'd like to give you a bit of a backdrop where I'm coming from because I think I've had this problem of overeating my entire life. I was very, very young when I realized that there was something inherently wrong with me when it came to food. And I come from a long line of drug addicts, food addicts, and the mentally ill. And so I struggled with the food, and I remember all these, you know, all these scenes from my childhood where it became always more and more obvious that it was a real problem. And when I was 24, I believe, um, yeah, 24, I found myself going to a different 12-step program, to Al-Anon, because I certainly belonged there. And I'd been going to these meetings, and I was extremely overweight, and was heavily in the food when I decided I wanted to get a sponsor and do the steps. And I called my mother's AA sponsor, who was both an alcoholic in AA, a recovering alcoholic, and a recovering overeater. And I said, I've been going to these Al-Anon meetings, but obviously I have a huge problem with food, so maybe I should rather go into like an Overeaters Anonymous meeting and do the steps there. And she said, well, for some reason you're finding resonance in different 12-step program and you're going to those meetings, so just do that and trust that whatever is going to happen is going to happen, and you'll be guided, and um it's all part of the program or something like that. And I just said, oh, I'll just take your advice. And I found a sponsor in Al-Anon, and I did the steps, and she was right. I had this massive spiritual awakening, and my entire life changed from it. Yet nothing in my surroundings changed. And I was suddenly happy and free for the first time in my life in all aspects, except for the food. And I just kept gaining weight, and I was morbidly obese. And so I did the only sensible thing and tried to have a surgeon remove a part of my stomach. So I went into this massive program in Iceland to have gastric bypass surgery. And it's a really, really intense program in Iceland. You get physical therapists and nurses and doctors and trainers and, facilities. And I was supposed to lose 7 kilos to be able to have that surgery as a symbol of having changed my lifestyle. And I just kept gaining weight and gaining weight. And that's the reason I wanted to tell you this is twofold, because on one hand, it was the ultimate experience for me that no human power could relieve me from my addiction, and no human power could restore me to sanity, because all of these very ambitious professionals certainly tried, and as did I, truly, for most of my life. And so after about 11 months of that program, I completely gave up and surrendered. And I'd known about GreySheet for a little bit because I knew a person who did, and I thought it was the most terrible thing in the world. And so when I decided to go to a GreySheet meeting, I still thought it was the most terrible thing in the world, and that I thought I was going into prison for life, and that's where I belonged, which is mostly just a testament to my my surrender, because it was absolute, and I was willing to do truly anything. And so when I started on day one, weighing 142 kilos, just something over 300 pounds, I'm not quite sure. I was blown away by the fact that I'd been able to do this for a day. That had probably never happened for at least a decade before. And I remember going to bed that night thinking, that actually just happened. I ate 3 weighed and measured meals that day, and I ate nothing in between, and it was mind-blowing. And a few days later, maybe a week later, I was going out, and I've been weighing and measuring for something like 7-8 days. I was going out, and I obviously still weighed over 300 pounds, and nothing had changed in that regard. But I looked in the mirror and I thought, yeah, I look perfect, just the way I'm supposed to. I'm at exactly the place I'm supposed to be at right now. And it was this newfound self-respect that I didn't remember having ever felt before. And it wasn't because I looked amazing or like a supermodel, like I had always thought that I would have to do in order to feel good about myself. But because I'd weighed and measured 3 meals a day and eaten nothing in between for something like a week. And I so often think back to that moment and realize it's one of those things where they say self-respect is for people who do respectable things. And whenever I put my scale on the table in front of me and I weigh my food, it's a respectful thing that I do for myself, like a bond between me and my higher power. Like we made an agreement that he would restore me to sanity. And this is one of my primary tools for that to be able to happen. And another thing I was thinking about is abstinence is the most important thing in my life. And it's very evident when I weigh my food, because I could be in the middle of a conversation or someone's trying to talk to me and I don't hear, I don't see. It's like I'm gone somewhere else because I'm weighing my food, and it just takes precedent over everything else. I'm completely unable to do anything else while I do this. I can't, carry a conversation. And at the same time, one of the most terrifying things of being abstinent at the beginning was having to weigh and measure in front of other people and in public. And that's why I wanted to tell you about my background in Al-Anon, because as my days got longer and my abstinence got longer, I started realizing that probably wasn't an accident that I'd found Al-Anon first, because I was so terribly sick of codependence and the fear of other people's opinions of me and what I did and how I looked, that it would have been an absolute nightmare for me to have to weigh and measure food, being a food addict and compulsive eater, and maybe even having to have to explain that to somebody else without having some form of solution from that spiritual malady that codependence is. And now whenever I find myself in that position and I feel that fear, because it still happens, that I go, what will people think when I bring up this scale, and all of these people, and I live in a tiny little town and everybody thinks something of everybody here. And but now I always find it at the same time really liberating, because I bring out my scales and it becomes this empowering moment of, yeah, this is what I do, and I do this for me. And I celebrate when people ask me about it, I prefer when people notice it and ask me about it, and I get a chance to share exactly what it is that I do and why, which is, would have been unthinkable for me had I not had the 12 steps and the freedom that they had given me, both previously and, of course, in these rooms. And
you've got 5 minutes left.
Oh wow, that went by fast. And so I sometimes disregard the actual weighing and measuring, because for me it's so obviously a spiritual disease. I tried, figuring it out as a physical element that could be cut out in surgery. That didn't work, or thankfully I never got that far. And then I just weigh and measure to stay sober. I sort of sometimes discard that part a bit, but which is why it was really good for me to have to speak about it in these terms, because it got me thinking about that meditative state that also I'm in when I weigh and measure my food, and how that's this constant act of surrendering 3 times a day. And even though I'm not gonna act like I put down my scales and I pray to a higher power and it's all this, blissful spiritual moment, it's still always that spiritual act of surrendering, which is the absolute foundation for my recovery. And especially now when I've been thinking about this as well, because I'm dealing with all sorts of things right now in my personal life, and also because of, a pandemic and everything. And there's a lot of uncertainty in my life personally. And I find whenever I go through these moments or weeks or months where life gets a little hard and it's a little, there's all of this uncertainty, and this is like the absolute stable point of my life, and I become so grateful that I have this anchor that anchors me down no matter what, and that I don't have to eat over whatever I'm feeling, and I'm feeling lots. Lately I'm feeling quite a lot, to be honest, and it does not occur to me to medicate that with the food, which is completely insane for a compulsive eater like myself. And I kind of, like Miguel said earlier, I don't really know how that works. I don't really know how I came to surrender so completely at that particular moment. I just know that that is my absolute foundation for recovery, that this program, the food program, and weighing it works completely for me, as radical and insane as it sounds to outsiders. And that I'm sustained, and my life is healthy in abstinence, which is the opposite of what it was before. And so this particular equipment, the scales, because I don't use cups, I've never been able to do that. I always just weigh. And in Iceland, we weigh in grams, which is, I don't know if you do that, but it's tricky. It's a scientific procedure. It's so accurate. So it's my judgment, or my eyes, or how I feel, or how well I slept, or how much I exercised, absolutely has no business around the food. It's just numbers on a scale. And it's just like you said before, what I believe would be this terrible prison that I would never see, a happy moment again in my life when it came to food, became the most liberating act of my life. And I don't mean to sound too dramatic, but it was literally like I was set free, as you probably all, have heard before and probably felt. Realizing that moment when you step out of your actual prison and into the freedom. Okay. Yeah, it's what I'm most grateful for in life, I think. So great to see all of you. Thank you so much.